Community Voices is a branch of BLMK that seeks to amplify the voices in the local community. This branch showcases critical topics while connecting and unifying communities. BLMK's Community Voices builds an intercultural bridge that creates a better understanding between the Black expat community in Korea, Korean citizens, and all other immigrant communities in South Korea. Interview topics explore a wide range of subjects, including Korean international adoptions, Korean labor law, Black influence on Korean music, and families living in Korea. BLMK is committed to educating about the importance of Black lives, highlighting Black excellence, and making a difference in the community.
EJ Asare, welcome to BLMK Community Voices. Today we will be talking about Korean adoptees, and Ben Coz is our moderator. Ben?
Hi, thank you again, EJ and Erin and BLM Korea for having us here, and also thanks to all the panelists that showed up today. We are now on part 2 discussion. I highly encourage you to check out the part 1 if you want a really quick fast forward into how we got to the discussion we're about to have. So I'm not going to read out all of these, but there are some things that I would hope people might take the time to look at myths and realities within international adoption. In the first part, we really talked about who constructs narratives and what the incentive is for constructing those narratives. A lot of that has to do with power and who stands to gain what. And oftentimes, I think the other panelists would echo this, it's not adoptees that actually have the loudest voice in these systems and within international adoption and domestic adoption. So all 3 of our panelists here today actually do varying work and ways to sort of address this. So just a reminder that our panelists are Han Boon-Young, Min-Young Chang, and Cory Lemke, and you'll be hearing about a lot of the work they do here shortly. So here we go. You can see here are discussion questions today. I'm going to take this down in a second so people can see the lovely panelists. Okay, and the screen should be unshared now. So, without further ado, what role has adoption played in your identity? And I want to first toss this question over to Cory because I know you have a lot to say.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, this is an interesting question. I feel, within the community, I think within the greater, Korean adoptee community, and some people don't even really like using the term adoptee within our community, preferring adopted person instead. And I kind of can see, I personally don't get offended when people call me an adoptee, but I can see why that might be the case. I think adoption is something that happened to us. It's not necessarily, I don't know, something that defines my identity. I mean, I think at one point in my life it did, but it's a strange question. I personally don't identify with adoption. It's just something that has happened to me in my life and now informs what I do in my life. And it's evolved over time. I think when I was in high school, probably college, I was very, 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 dialed into the adoptee community and, CADs and what they were doing. But I think the thing that really changed my view on this was reunifying with my Korean family. And it's difficult, I don't think we, it's not something we talk about in our family. We instead talk about, the political development of Korea, or like this was difficult for us in the 80s, or like when you were born, this is what was going on, and this is part of the reason why, so it's for me, and I'm very perceptive to these things, I think, of politics and power and things like that. Yeah, I think I'm more in tune with building my Korean identity, my American identity, my just Cory identity, whatever, these days. And so that's how I would answer that question. Is I think it isn't the defining thing of my identity. It's not part of my identity, but it does inform my identity, if that makes sense.
Boon-Young, what do you think?
I wonder if I can add to that. I would also say that, ironically, I mean, I'm studying adoption, and I don't do adoption 24 hours a day, but it takes up a large part. However, if it needs to be black and white, then I'm interested in Korea in terms of my identity, in terms of what I see is important. Also, as Cory said, adoption is something that happened to us. So I would say, in a way, I don't feel this adopted identity is authentic. It's not something that I have decided. It's not something I have chosen. So some of us have played around with the idea, and I want to be careful in phrasing this, but I will try, that it's kind of a reverse coming out experience, in the way that everybody knows I'm adopted. I'm just the only one who doesn't really understand the concept, the history, and all the political, social, legal implications around it. And so taking charge of your adopted identity, I don't know what that would look like, because others created this for me. But for me, it was a choice to come to Korea. It was my choice, to pursue the studies, the work that I do. And of course, I mean, adoption is not irrelevant. It's not that I don't want to deal with it. I also see it as a trauma. And so maybe the challenge could be to come to a point where the trauma does not, dominate you or determine your path, but you come to a stage where you can articulate, your experience, and with that, take control of it.
Young Chang, what do you think?
Before me to international adoptee, I didn't know and I didn't recognize how difficult it is the Korean adoptees living in the other country. Because I did not know before 30 years old, I was not adoptees. I just recognized when I was 13 years old. A major things is yes, same answer, fighting with my own identity and justification of my existence. Why am I here and why am I living? Who abandoned me, and why am I living with my adoptee parents? That was my major question when I was living with my adoptive parents in Warsaw team. I'm not sure, but the major difficulty is the security. I believe everyone know about my adoption status in my beliefs, but no one tell me about the truth. You are adoptee, and why your adoptive parents adopt you. That is the major difficulty when I was young. And please, the Min-Young and Cory, please, what's that? The explain about your own experience. What is the differences? What is the international adoptees as an international adoptee? Yes, that is my difficulty when I was young, and I think it is all of my life, and we will struggle with my and our adoption status, adoption issue, I believe.
Something I feel compelled to at least mention after hearing all three of you speak is that there are a lot of variations, I think, within adoptee experiences. And just to recall back to the first part of the presentation, you have over 6 years, almost 70 years, 7 decades of international adoption, 3 different waves, according to someone like Arissa Oh, one of our colleagues, Han Pil-shik, he claims that there's 5 different waves. So, and as you can see that there's different policies both in receiving countries as well as Korea, so different administrations, and just personal preference and identities, and people are all at different places, which is perfectly fine. But I do want to stress upon people that there's such a variation, 15 different countries that have received adoptees over this time span. So the variation is very vast. And I don't think any of us would ever claim to say that we have the gospel or the only truth, but that there are many different truths. I really appreciate Boon-Young bringing up the idea of trauma, something that often comes up. And there's a counterbalance to this, of course, too, but just the idea of loss. And I think that's something that's very glossed over in sort of the cotton candy narrative of saving orphan children. And as we know, historically speaking, most adoptees actually had a living parent, right? So I would really encourage people to do a little bit more digging if they can, and even see how it's connected to, domestic policy in the United States and or other receiving countries, because that influences what happens over here too. So that being said, it's a perfect transition to the next question, and I'm gonna hand it right back to you, Young Chang. What are some challenges, would you say, of navigating adoption?
Code is major. Difficulty is my voice record. I don't have find any voice record in the public or private, which means maybe my existence is distorted. Why the others fake my birth record, or why others hide my birth record? That was the major difficulty when I tried to find my birth record and when I tried to find my birth parents. In current more than 30 years, I tried to find my birth family and my own birth record, but still I cannot find any answer from the others and from the government and from the society. Only I can guess. I was born in Jeolla province, which is in Korea, the southern part of Korea, and I just visit at there, and I can guess of how did I abandon at that time, and how difficult it was my birth parents. That's only I can guess, and that's only I can find the information from the library, not from the relevant person. That is the major difficulty. Yes, in still, but the many system was changes, but many was that the adoptees cannot find their old generation of adoptees. I think it's not too old. it just the law change was only 10 years back. Yeah, that's the difficulty when I was trying to find my adoption identity and my birth record. Yeah, birth record is most important, I believe.
Something I really want to quick add to that too is I think a lot of people might not have to think about the fundamental question of, is my name my real name? Is my birth date my real birth date, right?
Yes. Correct.
And even along with that, even if you're not interested in that, because there are some adoptees that aren't, more pragmatically speaking, what kind of health conditions might I be, genetically predisposed to? And if you don't have access to that information, there's just a big question mark there. Boon-Young, I feel like you'll give a very compelling answer on this as well.
Thank you. So Ben, you brought up narrative in the beginning, in the first part, and I think that's really like spot on in the way that when we talk about navigating, I see it, you know, there's the individuals, there's the private person, and then there's the collective. And I think as an individual, one of the major frustrations and challenges and all of that is really that the collective do not understand us. The collective has not really, you know, went over the mountain and see who we are. So if you interview other adoptees, often you will hear, you know, the stories from the cab drivers, because that's really a moment when adoptees have to interact with local Koreans. There's no escape when you're in the cab. And that usually comes out as a, you know, almost re-traumatizing experience. And I think that comes down to really the lack of change on the collective level. We should not have to do this. We should not have to go through this and negotiate this daily. But the discussion is still at such, ironically, at an early stage, where people look at these, you know, individual experiences, but we have not come to some kind of collective consensus. And this is, you know, what adoption is. I know that you're also maybe interested in hearing like what to ask an adoptee, what not to ask. But I think the lack of the collective change really means that the individual will have to struggle again and again and again. And it takes us nowhere, really. It just stresses us out. Yeah, that was not a very positive response, but yeah.
Doesn't have to be positive. I think there's some realities, again, that we're trying to make sure that we discuss today, because I think some people might not have thought about this before, which is completely okay, but purpose of discussion. Yeah. Cory, what do you think?
Sure, yeah. My answer is really kind of an amalgam of both of their answers. I really feel like I want to go deeper into Boon-Young's answer a little bit. I kind of feel like there's different collectives as well that adopted people need to navigate within. So there's, in my story, there's the collective of, you know, the United States and being accepted there as a legitimate Asian American experience. You know, or being accepted in the Korean American community, where they're like, well, you're not really Korean, you don't really understand us, you know, or whatever. There's the collective of my Korean family coming back and weirdly just being accepted based on my blood, but, you know, and reculturating and trying to fit into the family and have similar values, or you know, that socialization was very different. My American socialization was very different than what, you know, they did, what they do in Korea here. And so what does that mean for me? What do I do? Do I hold these values? What do I do with that, you know? And then kind of as Boon-Young was talking about the collective of Korean society, and these questions of, you know, dealing with the Korean government and bartering and really trying to negotiate that we do exist, that you can't just write us out of this, and that we legally now exist, and, you know, we want these things. We want access to our birth records. We want to be able to communicate with Korean people, and especially our Korean families. And I kind of want to counter this narrative that our birth families don't want to talk to us. Maybe. I think it's within the realm of possibility. That, you know, you have a situation where, you know, they got pregnant and, you know, but in my experience in talking to Korean people, I actually, Boon-Young, have a story. It's heartbreaking, really, of a cab driver who learned, he was asking me why I speak with an accent when I speak Korean. And I told him, oh, you know, I was adopted and, you know, I grew up in the United States. And he stopped the car and turned around and looked at me. And he's like, when were you born? And I told him, and he's like, do you know, can you help me find my son? And what he said, he told me that he did not know, him and his wife, his partner, had their baby, but they took the baby to what they thought was basically like a daycare. And then when they went back to pick him up, he wasn't there. And now they've spent so much of their lives searching for their son. And I was just thinking in this cab, oh my God, how many families in Korea are searching for their child, you know? So I think that's something we need to keep in mind here, is that, you know, it's different collectives as well. You know, Korea was very, very different 40 years ago. It was a very different government. It was authoritarian and things like that. And that's not to diminish what responsibility I think the modern Korean state has. But I think we do need to keep in mind as well, you know, there were some very horrific things that happened under the autocratic government. And these things are coming to light now, and our stories are part of that larger narrative. But maybe we as a community need to do better connecting that narrative, our personal narratives, to that larger Korean narrative of collective trauma. So that's what I would like to say.
Something I just want to add to this conversation as well, too, is that going back to the idea of ethical transparency, and the story you just told is a perfect example, Cory, of the way that I think adoption agencies have a lot of power, specifically on the Korean side, where they've coerced mothers to sign away, to relinquish their children in order to just receive life-saving medical attention, right? And this is another part that I think should be very illuminating to people, is that for the longest time, adoption agencies have also counseled single moms. So if you don't see a complete conflict of interest there, I would be quite startled, because it's like the same people that are sending children abroad that have an obvious financial incentive to do so are the same people that are consoling and or withholding services from mothers. So again, it comes down to this idea of power. Yeah, I think it's something that like it shouldn't sit easy with anyone, and now things are being challenged. Another thing I want to point out too is that these 4 adoption agencies have never been fully audited. So we actually don't know how much money they have or where that's gone to, which should also be very alarming. Yeah, I think that has to do a lot with the work that's being done on the ground, and that has been being done for several decades now. And if you look at Korea's, you know, the miracle on the Han, you have the chaebols, which are considered the first contributing factor to the South Korean economy. Then you have remittances sent from abroad, from different countries like Germany, Saudi Arabia, for labor. And then some scholars even argue, in the absence of transparent social welfare services, that international adoption is actually the 3rd contributing factor to the South Korean economy, historically speaking. So I hope people will keep that in mind. If we move on to the next question here, I know, pretty heavy topic, but what are some positives people think are in navigating adoption? Boon-Young.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to say here. I mean, certainly there is, there's value in exploring this part of your identity, right? And so the more you learn about adoption history, obviously you can, you know, speak of your own experience in a different way, in a more confident and accurate way. But I also think it would be, I don't like the idea that actually the impacted people have to solve the problem in the way that this is just an extra burden on me and other adoptees, and we're already, you know, kind of struggling, trying to figure out life. And I can't really speak to how it is culturally in the US, but certainly here in Korea, if you are a person who is impacted, then you do have a certain say, and you do have a certain position of power in social matters. But then it also becomes all on you to fix it. And I simply don't agree. I don't understand that logic, because if we recognize a group as a minority, then that's for a reason. But then how can you expect this group whom you recognize for their vulnerability, to go out and fix something in the case of adoption that has not been fixed really in 70 years. I don't think it's a coincidence that we see a lot of adoptees who come through college who start, researching adoption. I think it speaks to just how important it is to know your history. So I guess, kind of asserting that, kind of claiming that, reclaiming that is a positive, but I'm looking forward to the day maybe where we don't have to do this.
Young Chang, how about you?
Well, I'm not sure it is positive or negative, but during my process of finding my own history, I was able to think more about the purpose of the life, why we are living in this planet. I'm not sure. Is it negative or positive? I think it is positive because I can imagine about the human's life from my own history. When I was baby, I was abandoned from my birth family, and how my birth family struggle with their life. I can guess directly because they are my birth family. And how my adopted parents was that support me during the more than 40 years. Anyway, so actually they don't have much money when they was that feed and take care of me. Even if they try to try to take care of me. So yeah, that is the positive things when I was searching my own story. And one more thing is I have chance to meet a good friends like you. International adoptee. I have many international adoptee during my the adoption issue and adoption related works. That is, I have two things.
I'm going to add on to a little bit here too. I think part of, again, going back to narrative is like oftentimes the idea of adoption is really constructive, is this really positive thing. And it's not that there aren't positives that come with that, but I myself, I've had my own struggles, as we all do in life, but also I've grown up watching other adoptee friends take their own lives, battle with substance abuse, battle with physical violence and or sexual violence at the hands of adopted families, your parents or community members. So it's not, I think it's a misnomer to say that someone's life is better because of adoption. And I would really encourage people to think critically about that, because there's no way in my mind I could ever say that my life is better because of adoption. It's certainly different, but seeing the vast range of experiences and Young Chang talking about meeting people from all over the world with different experiences, it's impossible to generalize. For me, I guess if I had to say anything, it would just be, and I say this to, specifically for anyone coming out of a hard place or dealing with trauma or navigating, adverse experiences. I hope the idea of resiliency and leaning into navigating difficult experiences and being able to share that with others. That's one positive that I try to ruminate on.
Adoption certainly, it's never a positive thing. It's never for us, maybe for the family, the adoptive family who's getting a child or expanding their family or whatever, however they sell it, maybe for them, it's this beautiful thing, but for us behind it, it's very sad. And as Boon-Young and Young Chang kind of said before, it's very, very traumatic for us. We lost somebody. It's never a good situation. Adoption is never the result of some sort of positive situation. Now, in my activism, I would say we as adopted people, or at least as adopted American people of color, as transnational adoptees living in the United States or whatever, I constantly hear like activists in other communities saying like, if only white people were listening, or if only, this group of people were listening to us, how do we get our message to them? I want to say to our community that it is so, so important to be allies to our, our communities of color, other communities of color, queer people, disabled folks, all of these different communities. It is so, so important. We are that. I don't know, like, I am so adjacent to white people, that I can, and I do. When I am in those spaces, I do try to, without me and my adopted siblings, other people of color in my family, I love them, but these white people would not have, exposure to this discourse. They would not be exposed to it. And so it is, I think, our responsibility to make sure that it does get to them, that racism does impact us too. And if we're experiencing this, what is this like for somebody living, in worse conditions, who have a longer history of oppression in the United States? What does that look like? We have a responsibility there. And I just want to kind of echo what I said at the beginning of this talk, is get involved. If that's the only thing that you do is have a conversation, I think it's very, very important to have. So that's what I say there. Thank you.
Great answer. I'm loving it. For the concern of time, I want to lean into this last question here, because some people might be asking, how can I support? How can I get involved? I'd like to swing this back around to Boon-Young. Maybe, helping is by not asking intrusive questions, for example. It could be anything at all. But what are some things you would recommend to people?
Oh, I mean, yeah, support, help can happen, I guess, in a lot of different ways and on a lot of different levels. Some of the very practical things and like instant, immediate things people in Korea could do would, join a seminar like this, leave with a bit more critical mind, and as you said, go and search for other material. Go on Facebook, like what people are uploading, anything, people who are able to donate to some of the organizations that we work with and work for. I think that's kind of the immediate things that you can do. For people who might have more time, more resources, help us get legislation passed. So, the stakeholders, the impacted people here can, reach to better conditions, because adoption is still happening. But even without adoption, I mean, a lot of families are at risk. A lot of children are not safe. So I think one thing is, when we started, and I can't really claim that, but 20 years ago, it was a lot of talk about stop overseas adoption. And it has decreased so much that in numbers, it's not so relevant, but that doesn't mean that all children are in safe homes, right? So I think that could be a next step. And that's why a lot of adoptees also see this and are supporting unwed mothers. So I think that would be like a significant move to do. Yeah, Ben, you also, I'm going to just divert slightly, but when you mentioned in the beginning the effect of Western so-called social welfare in Korea, and I think we do kind of understand and see how the influx of Western support has almost prevented Korea from developing a social welfare system. So in praxis, what that means is, one example, as the cab driver that Cory mentioned, there is not really a centralized system, for example, for missing children. So only 2-3 years ago, by law, did Korea establish this National Center for the Rights of the Child. And then under that, they have these 8 branches now. One of them is the one that takes care of adoption, but still, I think if people want to understand adoption, I want to encourage them to understand really all the related social issues, social, political, legal issues, because adoption is not supposed to be an isolated issue. Children are not supposed to just be filtered into an adoption program. The family is supposed to receive help. But this is actually what we are trying to change here in 21.
Really quick, you touched on organizations, Boon-Young, and I'm wondering, what are some organizations you might shout out by name?
So in terms of unwed mothers, there is KUMFA, Korean Unwed Mothers Families Association. That's a group run by unwed mothers for unwed mothers. And I know they're also on Facebook and easy to find. There are other groups for unwed mothers by unwed mothers, such as INTRI and I'm Mom, who's based in Daegu. There is an organization called KUMSUN, which is a support/lobbying group for unwed mothers. There are adoptee groups, and we are kind of working on a small project. So anybody who wants to help, able to help overseas adoptees based in Korea, please get back in touch with maybe Ben. Min-Young Chang is the president of Domestic Adoptees. So I think that would be great to support them. They have a wonderful YouTube channel. So maybe that's, you could pull resources towards that. We also have actually a great group of adoptive parents who now, in recognition of like overcoming some of whatever, led them to adoption, their own insecurities or imagination ideals, but see that their children are suffering and they want support for this. Ironically, when they then go and ask for support, there is nothing. So yeah, we're also collaborating with that group. There is a smaller group, a bit of informal group that's called the Truth Table. And when you write it out, then it looks like the Truth Table. That's run by an original mother. And I think it would be also really very significant for adoptees when our families are able to come forward and do this without fear of being re-stigmatized or that was some of the groups.
Thank you. We'll make sure to post some of those links or just contacts for those groups later. Young Chang, how about you? How would you encourage other people to support? How could your group maybe use support?
Yeah, in domestic adoptees group, we, there are many international adoptees try to change the Korean society and Korean system for the children's right and babies and unwed mother. The major problem is the communication with the lawmaker. I think, because many my international adoptees friends try to change and try to meet the lawmaker, but the difficulty was the communication in Korean, and not much Korean lawmaker can speak English. That's the reason they cannot express, they cannot try to understand to the lawmaker how they were difficult in their own country. But I'm a Korean and I'm domestic adoptee, and I can easy to explain about the adoptees, the experience and adoptees mind, what is their difficulty, how was it. And that is the good thing to the supporting to the change of the society and change of the law. And I am working with, as mentioned by the Boon-Young, we are working with other adoptees group, like unwed mothers, especially unwed mothers. I did not know how they try to take care of their own baby. I thought unwed mothers or my birth parents just abandoned me but it was not. They tried to keep their baby and take care of their baby, but the problem was a society. The problem was a financial issue. Many of the things was that managed by government, but they did not. They did not. That was the major problem, I think. So what can we do now then? We should change it, the system, and we have to tell that to our country people, not only people, the lawmaker. Why didn't you take care of your own baby? Mean the government-wise, the country-wise. The problem was there. I think, but not too soon, but in 3 or 5 years, many things are changed from the bottom. The many people that try to think, what is a good thing about adoption? What is a good thing for the baby and children? Not only adoption. Yeah, adoption was an alternative way of the take care of the baby, but it's not only that things. They're supporting the unwed mother was that poor parents is more important. I think that is a good thing of domestic adoptees group, and we are supporting what we are doing now. Am I correct answer? I try to explain.
You sounded great. Can people reach? It sounds like what you're saying is people could even contact their local politicians.
Yes, right.
On this issue. Okay, so even in other European countries or the United States, this is leaning more into Cory's territory. But even just having a strong opinion about that and making them vocalize, and again, it goes back the idea of challenging narratives, I guess. Yeah, sounded fantastic to me. The last question, I guess, I think we'll have time to ask all of you today are, what are some things that you want people to know about being a Korean adoptee? And we'll start off with Cory.
Sure. Yeah. I guess what I would say to maybe this particular audience that's listening to us is, I assume the people listening to this are, somewhat versed, or at least partially versed in critical race theory. They understand race and things like that. I would say that we as Korean adoptees, particularly in the United States, occupy a very interesting racial space. And I'm really curious to see how this plays out, in the elections and things like that, how the Korean adoptee community is using this narrative and, what it means for us as a people, as American people. So it's something I encourage this particular audience to think about, is our experience. I don't think there's a simple answer there as to, we are Asian or we are white or we are whatever. We're kind of part of this, and I think it's more and more common, this kind of transnational, transracial even ? Sort of identity. And we're figuring out what that means and what that lived experience is like and things like that. And so I would say to people who, live in realities where, their race, matches, their upbringing or their culture or whatever, I don't know. I would say reach out to some of these transnational people, these folks. And it's not just adoptees as well. Even in Korea, we have, Tamungwa families, multicultural families who are not just ethnically Korean and things like that. Reach out to different communities and learn about them. And I'll do my best to learn about you on our end, So I think that's where we build power. And that's how we begin challenging these narratives that have been put on us, is by, building community and listening to each other's stories.
Awesome. Boon-Young, how about you?
It's difficult to follow right after Cory. Yeah. Oh, so the one thing, if there's one thing that maybe I would like non-adoptees to understand about adoptees, whether you're a Korean adoptee or not, is that it's a lifelong experience. You don't grow out of being an adoptee, right? You can work with it, you can mold it, you can control it, you can play with this part of your identity, but it is for life. And I think now we see the children from adoptees growing up, and so we see this intergenerational consequences of these political decisions made in the 50s, the 60s. So it continues. And yeah, maybe the other thing just to keep in mind would be like adoption is, I think, more a really political decision. It's a political creative program. This is less about really protecting vulnerable families. Rather, we have this program that almost allows to exploit vulnerable families, and transfer their children. Yes, I think as a European, I slightly want to comment on race, but that would require several hours of the differences, between the US and like a colorblind country as Denmark. So yes, I will refer to Cory again if that's needed.
Young Chang, what do you want people to know about being a Korean adoptee?
What's that? You mean what they should know about the Korean adoptee as a domestic adoptee? Am I correct? Actually, major difficulty with the international adoptee and Korean adoptee is the international adoptee is not possible to security because already they known about from their face color. The domestic adoptee is not possible to express I'm adopted. So many or almost domestic adoptee is security. There's some major different things, and other the people should know, and I think we should know the adoptees, not only child, adoptees is the mindset and mind thinking, what they are thinking, and what was the what they was at the pale, not pale actually, what they was at the lake of their own life. What is the upset of my heart, of my previous history? I would like to know the story of the adoptees. What they don't have, like the not adoptees, but they think the children are same and the babies are same. But actually, it is not same. Little bit, not too little, quite different when they grow up and when they find their own identity. So we would like to know the mind of the adoptees, and I think that is my answer. And other support, like not only the physical support, they try to understand what did I say told. Yes.
Thank you. Well, I think it's time that we have to wrap up here. Of course, we could go on for hours more and even get into critical race theory, which I would love, but we don't have time for that. Something I just want to make sure that I impress here as we're closing out is that the same systems, I think, of power that we're all affected by in some way or another are the same things that we can unify around. So I hope that's something that we can all keep in mind and work towards building with each other in solidarity. With that being said, I want to give one more last thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for your insights and time. Appreciate it so much. Thank you to Erin and EJ, and thank you to Black Lives Matter Korea. And last but most importantly, thank you, the viewer, for tuning in today and hearing about our experiences in our communities. I'm going to hand it back to EJ now.
Thanks, Ben. I'd like to thank our panelists, Young Chang, Cory, Boon-Young, and Ben, for speaking about such a personal and important topic. I really appreciate having you here. We will have a list of all the organizations you guys referenced at the end of this video. We wanted to thank you for watching another production of BLMK